put it in the group anyway. Welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, we're going to start dead on 7 o'clock. So just get yourself comfy, and we'll be with you shortly. If you're watching this on the replay, do make sure that when you post a comment, you do put replay so that we can see that you've watched it. I can see that people are joining the group already, which is lovely to see. But yeah, do put a comment if you're watching on the replay. Obviously, you don't need to if you're watching live. You don't need to say that you're watching live. Do give us your questions during the week. All of our speakers, all of our experts would love you to pose questions, not tricky questions, because we have all been working 10 hours, but nice questions, that useful questions that you would like us to help you with. And then obviously we'll be able to go to questions at the end. Hi, Rebecca. Hope you're well. Thank you for saying hello so soon, proving that part works. But yeah, I hope you like the blue. Hope nobody's got a problem with blue. The blue branding of Operation Respond. And I washed my hair for you as well. So aren't you lot lucky? So there you go. Right. Oh, it's dead on 7 o'clock. So welcome everybody. Welcome to our inaugural masterclass on Operation Respond. Got a few words to share with you. I'm your host. I'm Imogen Edmonds. I'm the owner of Redwing Solutions, and we're the UK's largest HR consultancy that specialises in day nurseries, preschools and out of school clubs. And it was my crazy idea to bring you Operation Respond. I'm quite good at these crazy ideas, you know. Take me when I'm really busy and I'll find a way to make myself busier. That tends to be how it works. We are not going to see your names on the live stream unless we look at the old mobile phone. So you'll notice that if StreamYard have said to you, please give permission to share your name, please say yes, and then we'll get to see your name. But obviously the beauty of this is you get to watch us, and that's why I've washed my hair, but we don't get to see you. So you can be sat there in your PJs enjoying a glass of wine and still participate in this evening's masterclass through the beauty of the fact that it's Facebook Live and the fact that you can pose your questions. Hi everyone. Hi Kate. So we won't see your faces. We'll be able to read your questions, and Jane will come to your questions this evening towards the end. We are obviously going to want you to take something away from this week of masterclasses. And so you will notice in the Facebook group, you know, there's always a file section to every Facebook group. You'll notice, and hope you've all printed it all out, this little fella, which is called the key action points, which is a sheet for you to take a printout, photocopy it during the week, and have your takeaways from this evening and from the next 4 nights written down so that you can go and put them in action. Because of course it's not about the bragging rights don't come from the fact that you attended the masterclass. The bragging rights come from the fact you put in place something as a consequence of coming on the masterclass. So do use this template to take your notes, but you know, pen and pad also works equally fine. So without further ado, I just want to introduce you to Jane, who's going to be our expert for this evening. Who is our expert for this evening? And obviously explain to you how we're going to work this. So Jane and I are hosting this evening. Jane's got some slides to show you. So Jane is Jane of Nursery Business Support, who's obviously going to give you the lowdown this evening on what we need to be doing in our businesses as we enter 2023. She's got some fantastic material to share with you this evening. So any questions you've got, pop them in the chat. And then we'll obviously see them. Let's try and make this as interactive as possible. So Jane might ask you questions. You know, you can pop agree, disagree. She might ask you, are you who's a nursery, who's a club, who's a preschool? You know, pop the word in the answer. Make this as interactive as possible. It really also helps with people being able to see these videos as they go into the group, because this is a closed Facebook group and we want people for it to reach as many people in the group as possible. We've got a couple of 100 people in the Facebook group now, and no doubt that may grow as the evening goes on. So without further ado, I'm going to shut myself up and hand you over to Jane. Welcome, Jane. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Imogen, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this absolute great idea. I do a lot of work with with nurseries and childcare settings, and this is something that's very pertinent to everyone at the moment. So yes, so I'm Jane Todd. If you haven't come across me before, I am a nursery owner. I've got a 74-place nursery in the northeast, and I work with nurseries. Well, it's varied over the years of what business support people have needed, from setting up nurseries or childcare settings, out of school clubs, or unfortunately closing settings down, setting up business systems. In COVID, it was the dreaded furlough calculations, a lot of work on that. But a lot of what I've been doing, which I really enjoy doing, is working with nursery owners and managers to make the business work the best they can. And the great thing is, because I am an educator first and foremost, I'm not just a business grey suit. You know, I trained as a teacher. I've got 3 education degrees. I'm passionate about quality education in the early years. I'm a real advocate for it. So it's always that balance of high quality education and childcare alongside needing to be a viable business as well. So and the way I work with settings is that personal approach of not just pulling spreadsheets, standard spreadsheets, and distributing them, but really getting to know that personal relationship with the setting owner or manager or whatever it is, and working together to solve what the issues are. So that's sort of what keeps me out of mischief at the moment. So that's what I do. So in terms of why we're here tonight, as Imogen said, 2023, people are approaching it maybe not as positive as in previous years, because setting owners are worried. They're worried about business rates going up. They're worried about funding not going up enough. They're worried about the bills going up. They're worried about so many things. And when you're worried about so much, it's really hard to sort of balance that with the positives sometimes. Now, we don't fully know how this year is going to pan out, but all the things I've just said, we do have concerns. Now, we can't change necessarily all of those, but we can change us and how we respond to them for our businesses, which is the whole point of this, why Imogen has set this up. So why businesses at the start of the week is because it makes sense of the other masterclasses, because we need to know where we're at in our business to know what we need to sort of chip into to help where we're at. So what we're going to look at tonight is the financial position we're in. And some of us might be doing better than we think. Some of us might think we're fine. And actually, when we do a few sums, go, a bit closer to the wire than I thought. And then it's okay. Once you know where you're at, you're in an informed position to work out what you need to do next. Because without that bit, there's no point worrying about paint going up £1 if you don't really know where you're at. And it's so easy for all of us. And I know this as a nursery owner, you're so busy dealing with so many things that, you know, knowing your break-even point or something might be on your to-do list, but you're dealing with so-and-so who's been sent home sick with a temperature, you know, the real life of running a nursery. So it's great to take some time out this week to kind of work on the business rather than in the business. Let's start the year with knowing where we're at, to know what things might be a worry for us and actually what we're not as bad as we thought. So let's work out where we're at. So I think from what I've heard from some messages I've had, that we've got some nursery settings here tonight, got some preschools, maybe some committee run, had some out of school clubs get in touch, and maybe even some childminders. Although my website might say Jane Todd Nursery Business Support, I do actually work with all of them. So I will use a case study of a nursery later, but it's not exclusive to nurseries. So don't be sitting there thinking, I'm not a nursery per se, I won't get anything out of this. This is for childcare settings and childcare providers. Okay. So you might have seen the graphic on this next slide that National Day Nursery Associations have put out there. It's quite a scary slide. Who's seen this doing the rounds on Facebook? This shows from 2017, the bottom orange line is what our funding rates are. And then the other lines are the blue one is business rates, and then orange and green are minimum wage for a couple of different ages. As you can see, they've gone up rapidly, and our funding is sort of plodding along the bottom. So although our funding's always not been great, as you can see, as the minimum wage has gone up, that gap It's getting pretty big now, isn't it? And I think this is what certainly set some waves amongst the settings and the sector when the new minimum wage came out for April. Now, we are not denying that our staff deserve a wage. They deserve paying in gold, don't they, for what our teams do. They're absolute stars. But unfortunately, for some settings who can only afford to pay minimum wage, the jump this year is scary. And I know settings that have already closed, settings that will close. Now, some of them, they've literally had no choice. And some of them, unfortunately, actually, there were things they could have done to prevent it. And this is where, if any of you are what looks on paper close to edge, there could be things we can do to prevent that, because no one wants anyone to close. Childcare is needed and early years education is needed. The provision for funded places is needed. You know, we're so important as a sector. We're so much more than just a business, aren't we? We're so much more. So we've got this gap, and it's easy to panic from those stats. Totally get that. Now, funding has always been relatively low, and although some of this, the documents have been out of what your authorities' funding is going up by, but some of you won't yet know what that means for you. I know some local authorities have already got it out there. I know ours, the Schools Forum, isn't until next month. So some of you know what it means and some of you don't. You know that the local authority can only top slice 5%, but you still might not know how they're going to be doing it with deprivation and things. So realistically, though, the 20p it might go up is probably not going to cover what your minimum wage is going up by. So we've got this gap. We've got a gap. And that's not the only gap that we need to be aware of. The key gap that we need to be aware of is your gap at the end of each month. This is the really, really key piece of information we all need to know to respond at the moment to what's going on. If you know what your gap is at the end of each month, you know how much give you've got for responding to the climate, and you know how close to the why you are or aren't. So which gap is this? This is at the end of the month when you've paid all your bills, what you have left. Now, if you've got absolutely nothing left at the end of each month, if your electricity bill suddenly goes up, what reserves have you got to deal with it? And if you've got actually quite a comfortable gap, okay, paper might have gone up and you might have a bit less in the pot, but you're still okay. But without that knowledge, you don't know where to respond. And also then using that to forecast ahead of where you might get in a pickle with things like the staffing costs going up in April. So this is the key piece of knowledge. If you're writing on your sheet, this is one of your nuggets to take away. Do you know your monthly gap? Now, I don't know how many of you watching now can confidently say, I know. And I know it changes roughly depending on you. But on average, do you know what your usual monthly gap is? And if you do, absolutely fantastic, but there's still some more for you, so you don't have to switch off. But if you don't, if you're thinking, I don't, but I should do, stick with it. So don't panic about it, but that is key, your key number, your gap. Okay. So, oh no, it's all shifted on my slides. This all looked lovely earlier. It's all jumped, folks. So sorry. This box is supposed to be your monthly income. This one's supposed to be your monthly expenses, and your gap is supposed to be over here, but it's jumped. Sorry. Never mind. The joys of technology, hey. So your monthly income, take away your outgoings, is your gap. Yep. But what do you use? What sort of figures are we using in that? So income. Now, yes, you've got your monthly invoices that you send to parents. You've got your funding. Don't worry, Facebook questioned, how do you work out with different costs each month? Yeah, I'll give you an example and explain about that. Yeah. So you've got your incoming, your invoices, you've got your funding. And now different settings might have different income depending on what they're doing. You might have send payments or DAF payments, apprenticeship payments, could be your solar panel income, could be your rent, something out for parties at a weekend. Any incoming money, okay, is your income. Now, some of that will be fixed and you'll know in advance. And this is where you need your cash flow sheet to know when your funding's coming in and what sort of invoices are coming in. Now, for your outgoings, I tend to split it into two things here. Oh, it's all jumped again. Sorry. There's your regular ones, which are either your direct debits or, you know, which are going out each month. You've got your staffing costs, your rent, your mortgage, your business rates, your utilities. You might be your learning journals, software, waste disposal, web hosting, things that are your regular monthly. Now, some of them might be set amounts. You might know your broadband is 30 quid a month every month, fixed. Great. Now, your staffing costs, it might be that you pay your salary staff, so it's a fixed amount each month, or it could be variable. So, if you've got someone off sick and you've got cover and you've got agency, you could have a huge bill one month. And that's why knowing your gap's helpful, to know that if you've got a month where you have got extra costs, whether you need to panic or not. One key thing with these staffing costs, remember, it's not just your £10 an hour you're paying Joe Blogs. Remember, your staffing costs, it's usually about 30% extra you need to add on to your hourly rate of what is your true cost for your business, which is covering your national insurance, your pension contributions, sick pay, holiday pay, all those other things. So remember, the staff who's off £10 an hour, really the cost to you is £13 an hour roughly. So remember that bit as well. So you've got your regular monthly outgoings, and then you've got your variable ones. And this is where it is hard to think of that question that came in to predict. Some of these are annual expenses. You've got your ICO annually. You might pay your insurance annually, or you might do it monthly. So certain things are still fixed. But repairs and maintenance, if your roof goes next month and it's 15 grand, have you got a pot of money? There could be unforeseen things. Learning resources, you might budget and you say we're going to spend £100 a month, or you might have the approach, we buy things when needed, which might mean suddenly one month you're needing to spend X amount on this and you didn't know about it. So this is hard where you've got the variables. Now, what I would probably advise is to look back at your expenses at the previous year. Now, it's not going to be an exact sandstorm coming, but it helps you to know, because sometimes these other expenses add up to more than you realise. And actually, once you look back, now what I tend to do is work out an average amount for what's been a year before, add a bit more, and say you might have an average of my monthly expenses tend to be on average my staffing costs plus £5 a month or something. So if you're doing your cash flow forecast, you're basing it on that. Now, one month might be a bit under, one might be a bit over, but on average, unless you get your huge roof bill at 15 grand that you weren't expecting, that from the past few years, it might have been 2 years ago was 4 grand. Last year you were spending about 4.5 grand. Therefore, this year expecting about 5 grand. So you do need to sort of look at your previous trends and think of what current things are going up by, because otherwise you could spend just hours every month looking at your actuals and changing your cash flow forecast. So you've got to think of your time as well. So sometimes with a lot of what I'm saying tonight, it's almost your best fit rather than every single penny, because things aren't fixed. Okay, and you've got things like DBS checks, staffing, recruitment fees, all these variable ones. Okay, so hang on, there's a questionnaire that's come in. I can only see half it, Imogen. How would you account for funding last month's payment being 60% and the other months being 40%? Now, this is where different local authorities pay funding in different ways. You've got some who split it between monthly payments. The authority I'm in, sometimes it's 85% up front at the beginning of term, 15% at the end. What I tend to do on your cash flow forecast is you might put it in the actual month it's received, but almost you're dividing it about the months it's got to cover. Because if in September you get 20 grand and you go, woohoo, I'm going to buy lots of new furniture, you might not be able to pay the staff in October and November. So you might get your 20 grand in September, but in your head you've got to be thinking, right, hang on, this is lasting 3 months. So therefore, you might need to, even though your payments come in when they come in, I would probably work out what the equivalent is monthly to make sure you've got enough to last through, so you don't get in a pickle. And try not to rely on the funding coming in for your paying staff that last month, because I've had it before where local authorities for some reason are paid late because they're recalculating something, and nurses go, the funding's not coming, I can't pay my staff this month. So it depends how you work, but just bear that in mind, that if they're for some reason late in a payment or something, you're reliant on that and you're that close to the wire, you could get in a pickle with paying staff. So So I've got a little case study. This is a very simplified case study. And yes, it is a nursery example, but adapt it to your setting. It's just trying to show for some of us who numbers just aren't a thing, or we're so busy we haven't had time to sit and calculate it, or whatever it is. So this is an example of a 40-place nursery. I called it Bluebells, thought it was nice and cheery. If you're a Bluebells nursery out there, I'm so sorry I've not stolen your nursery. I've deliberately said 2021-22 figures, so we can look at that and what the impact might be now in 2023 with costs going up. So for this 40-place nursery, said that the turnover is 310k. Now, I've worked with loads of settings where your turnover sounds huge and settings go, I've got 400 grand coming in, and it sounds such a lot of money. But then if your outgoings are 412k, it's not quite so great. And I've worked with settings who've got smaller turnover, but actually because they're running them really well, they're making more money then. So actually your turnover, although it might sound a lot, that's not actually the number we're focusing on. As I said, it's the gap, because your turnover doesn't mean anything without being in relation to those outgoings. So although it can sound such huge figures, and I've worked with managers as well, and go, oh, my owner's taking her 400k in. You go, are they taking it or making it? And there's a real difference. So some of these figures you think, well, I should be all right with such huge figures, but it all depends on those outgoings too. So we said in this case study, 310k is their income. And we said the staffing cost. Now this staffing cost is the one I mentioned earlier that's got all the staffing costs. So it's there. This is in figure at 185k is inclusive of pension contributions, HMRC tax payments, national insurance. This is the total cost. Now in 21-22, we would usually say an average of your turnover, your staffing cost is usually around 60%. Now, it's not a fixed science because of different settings, but it's sort of a guide. Roughly 60% would sort of be typical, okay, then for 21-22. So for our good old Bluebells nursery, now I've worked with some settings where I've asked what the running costs are, and they've had quite a short list. And actually, when I've calculated with them, when they're saying this doesn't make sense at the end of the month, I'm not making as much as I thought. There were loads of costs, and I've said, well, what about this? And what about this? Oh, yeah, I didn't include that. I've forgotten about that. And it's amazing how some of the smaller costs can really add up and catch you out. So this is from Bluebells Nursery, some of our outgoings, some of our running costs. So you might have rent or a mortgage, if depending where your setting is. Business rates. Now, some of you will not qualify for business rates or get small business rates relief. Some of you will be panicking because business rates are actually, there's a change in how they're going to be calculated from April. And if you're not aware of that, sorry, this is a slight tangent, but as we've just mentioned it, it's going to be calculated on units. And these units is your number of children. So where it's based on square meterage and it was based on your floor space, they've gone back to your Ofsted reports and they've calculated, so the figure is much higher because it's per unit. Now, for some settings I've been working with, the jump for April is huge. So if you haven't already done so and you pay business rates, or you think you were below the threshold before, double check on the VOA website now, because what you don't want is think, oh, if things are the same, and suddenly in April find your business rates bill has doubled and you weren't expecting it. So on your action list, if you've not already done so and your business rates payer, check on the VOA what it's saying your rateable value is for this year. Now, remember, the rateable value isn't what you pay. There's the multipliers, but double check what it currently is and what it's going to. So you've got that idea. So other running costs, we've got water, phone and internet, electricity, gas, waste disposals, often one people forget to add on, your nappy bin collection, contents insurance, building insurance, Ofsted registration fees. So they're the sort of running costs of your building and your business there. Then you've got your sort of provision supplies. So we've got food, and I was just looking at one of our Asda orders for September. It was about 165 quid, and this week's has gone in at 250 or something. I mean, it's only in a few months that the food has gone way up. I think more than the 10% they're saying things has gone up by our food bills. I don't know if you found this. Has anyone else found that food bills are one of the ones that have really shot up. And also things like when you put your Tesco order in, where you used to get substitutes the same quantity, you're getting to the value of, so you can be in a position where you're short of food on a Monday because they've sent Hovis bread, not another one, and suddenly you're sending your manager out to Lidl to get more bread, which is time and cost and money and things you're not expecting. These little things can really throw the running of a setting, time management and costs. Cleaning costs, program supplies, office supplies, and these might change each month. Other ones we've got there, your repairs and maintenance, and this can be hard because it might be that you've had a survey on your building, you might know things ahead and you've deliberately got a plan of when you're replacing your windows, when you're doing things, or you might get that unexpected bill and you're on a full repairing lease and suddenly you've got to find some money from somewhere. Learning resources, furniture, equipment, web hosting, that could be one that catches people out, how much it's costing actually for your website, for maintaining your website, for hosting your website and email, paying for your domain names. That can all add up. Marketing, accountancy fees, payroll if you outsource that, your learning journal software, management software. Quite a few nurseries settings have been caught up this year because your management software's gone up. One of the companies I know have gone up 50%. But when you've got all your children's data and all your invoices and you know the system, you're kind of a captive audience, because unless you suddenly want to shop around, find a new system, spend training time learning a new system and shifting all the data over, you often just say, we're going to stick with this because of the effort it's going to cause to change. But suddenly that extra 50% for that nursery might mean that they're then compromising something else they're having to provide for the children. DBS checks, if your staff turnover has been like lots of nurseries and settings this year, you've got a higher turnover of staff, so you've got higher cost of getting the first aid training again, getting the DBS again, your recruitment time again, your manager's time recruiting, more uniform. So some of these things, because of the climate and staff changeover, these costs have gone up and you're doing it with more frequency. So at the end of all that, for Bluebells, all those things add up to just shy of 70k for the year. So monthly, 5,782. So just shy of 6k. So what I said to you about you get an average monthly when you said about things changing. So what we've got there is we've added up what all of it actually costs for the year. And we've just roughly divided it by the 12. So that then if I knew I was doing my cash flow, because this was 21-22 for the next year, whereas that 6, I might say to be on the safe side, I'm going to put 6,300 in or 6,400 in as an average monthly. And some will cost more and some less, but it helps you know an average amount that you need to be allowing for. Otherwise, you'd always be working in retrospect, looking back at what have I actually spent, but you need some way of forecasting forward. So that gives you an approximation. You know what you have actually spent the year before, and then allow for that, the upward inflation, etc. So therefore, this Bluebells nursery, we know our staffing costs were 185k, and we know our annual running costs were 70k. So I bet this will have shifted again. Oh, not quite so bad. So what is the gap for Bluebells? So their income, as we said, was that 310k. So just shy of 26 grand monthly income. Their expenses, which you can see, they're just over 21 grand. So actually 4.5 grand is their gap. Yeah, for 21-22, which sounds all right, doesn't it? So we know that they've got 4.5 grand. This was in 21-22. So moving on, we know that inflation roughly has been about 10% this year. And as I said, with certain things, I think it's actually been a lot higher. Think of your free from foods. If you've got children on free from, on the shopping, some of those products have practically doubled in price. So if we allow this extra 10%, I've not changed the income at this point, by the way. So our expenses, if we add on 10% to what it was, have gone up to 23,375. So if we're allowing for that, our gap that was 4.5 grand, we've dropped to about 2.5 grand. Okay, that's if income stays the same. Yep. So what does this mean for Bluebells? Because the key thing is we need to know these numbers, but we also need to know why we need to know them and what it actually means for us. So good old Bluebells have got the £2.5 grand. What's that owner or manager thinking now? Well, they've got a few options. They've either might say, actually, we don't need to panic. We're still going to make £2.5 grand a month, and that still gives us some flex if costs go up. We're okay. We're just going to carry on what we're doing, and we're okay. But they know that and can make that informed decision. Or they might go, hang on, if it's dropped practically halved, £4.5 grand, 2.5, actually, we're not going to sit on our laurels here. We need to do something. And they've got two options. They've either got to bring more money in so that the monthly income's more, which means gap's bigger, or they've got to decrease their outgoings, or both. But they've got to do something if they want that gap to change. So that increase your revenue or decrease your outgoings. Now, if you're a mainly funded setting, there might be not a lot you can do on increasing revenue. And this is where some settings have got really creative and they're doing things like party venues or other things, or it might be that you can't really do anything about the revenue, which is why it's the outgoings you've really got to focus on. And that's where the extra pound for paint might be making a difference. And you might be having to review your provision. And then my thing with this is, it's how you review decreasing your outgoings without compromising the quality of what you're doing and the quality of your childcare. What costs can you adjust where it isn't going to impact your quality? Or what do you decide, well, actually, that can take a hit? Or what do you decide for your setting is a non-negotiable? And sometimes those decisions aren't made for a monetary reason, they're made educationally. But then sometimes when you realise the cost of that decision, you sometimes have to change your viewpoint on it. It might be amazing that you're offering a certain experience, but if it's costing something you can't afford and you can't pay your staff, there's no point in the kids having extra ballet lessons on Friday afternoons if the gap's not there. So at least if you're informed, you can look at that, and for your setting, what's important to you. So this is the key thing where you need to know these numbers. So if I ask you now, who honestly knows what their break-even point is, I'm not going to make you comment on it. If you don't worry, you're not going to, me, I don't. Because if you know your break-even point, and that's the, what it costs you to open your doors and what you have to take to not make anything but cover your costs and not lose, and how many children that is, then you know from there how many children are bringing profit. And that's where, as I said, some of you just haven't got the time to work it out. But it's particularly important if you take funded children, because the amount of times, the funding rate's not great. And some of you charge additional service charges, and you have to be very careful to make sure you comply with the terms and conditions of your local authority agreement. And some of them are tighter than others, but you have to make sure you comply with that. And there's ways to do that. There is ways, but for some settings, depending on the demographics in the area, you might have less flex than others. But I keep hearing settings say, I lose X amount per hour on them. And it might help to turn the thinking the other way around. You need to know what it actually costs you to deliver that funded place. Because your private place might cost you might get £6 an hour and your funding might be £4. So it's easy to say, I'm losing £2 an hour. But you're not losing. You're just not making as much as you are on a private place. But if it's costing you £6 to deliver that place and staffing, then yes, you are losing £2 an hour. And that's the key difference of knowing which it is. So you need to know, because actually you might have a whole load of funded kids who would not normally be coming to nursery. So if you didn't have those funded places, they wouldn't be your customers at all. So the way to see, you might be giving them an 80% discount, but because you've got 20 of them, you're still making a really good profit on them. Or it might be that actually, as I said, depending on your outgoings, you're losing money on your preschoolers, but you need to know that. And some nurseries I've worked with say, I'm losing all this money on my preschoolers. Then I've worked with them and I said, what age group do you think you're making the most money? Oh, it's babies, I charge most. And then when you work with them, it might be the baby room's actually making a loss because of the ratios of 1 to 3, or it's only breaking even. And actually, even with their slightly lower income for your preschoolers, overall, they're still making more money on the preschoolers. So it's sometimes your perception of what you think is happening, when you actually look at your numbers, you go, oh, it's not actually quite what I thought. So it's worth doing those sums to have a look. So you know which of your age groups is the most profitable. which one. It might be, your baby room doesn't make much money, but it's a good filler, and you get your siblings in and it keeps them all the way through, so it works for you. So you need to know which of your age groups, what the sort of the break even for them, what your profit point is, what you're doing. So you need to have this knowledge of your numbers to make these decisions. And then, as we said, your options are you're increasing your revenue or decreasing your outgoings. So if you're looking at increasing your revenue, as I said, it might be your funding offer. And I've worked with quite a few settings recently where they might have never changed the funding offer since they'd brought it in 7-8 years ago. And it might be you have to think about, are you charging for additional services or consumables, as some call it? And then you have to make sure on an invoice it's free at the point of end access. And there are, as I said, rules you have to comply with. But there are things you can, even in how you offer the funding. I mean, one setting I know of, unfortunately, closed, but they were offering really flexible to the point, Mum says, I want 9 till 3 1 week, 9 till 2. Oh, yeah, that's fine. But of course, they were staffing it with full staff all day and loads of flexi places. Now, it might be that for you, your USP is you're flexible and you get such a quantity of people coming to your setting because you're so flexible and it's your USP that it actually works. But for another setting, that flexibility might be your downfall, because actually it means that with your staffing being unpredictable, you're always losing money the 8 till 9 at the beginning, or from 3 till 6. So one good place to start is looking at your funding offer. Are you still meeting the requirements, but is there a way to offer your spaces either by charging more additional services or just changing how you offer it? Maybe not offering 3 hours every day, but you're offering it in blocks of 5 hours or whatever it is, to mean that you can actually either take more children and increase profitability that way, or just make better use because you're needing less staffing. So funding is a really good place to start with that. And it might be, as I said, the model you changed. It might be increased hours. It might be that you are open 9 till 5 and actually you do some market research with your parents, and they'd all pay, there'd be quite a good number who'd pay extra to start at 8 or stay till 6, and there might be an extra charge there. It might be the opposite of that. That might be decreasing your outgoings, that you open at 7:30 and you close at 7 at night, and actually you've only ever got one kid there and you've got 5 staff sitting there. So you might want to just review your models there. Now, in terms of outgoings, your biggest cost each month is your staff. Absolute biggest cost. So if you're going to spend time looking at how to decrease your outgoings, I would not recommend that you spend hours trying to find cheaper paint by £1 if it's taking you 6 hours of your time to do that, if you've not started with your staffing. Yeah. So it might get, with your point of nursery, that every 1p here of a loaf of bread does make a difference, but you start with your staffing. Are you staffing effectively? How are you deploying staff? You must meet the statutory requirements, must, but there might be ways of how you're staffing or how you're offering time that actually you could be saving that bit of money. And that, even one member of staff going home half an hour early might make a difference for a couple of grand over a year. And if that makes your gap go from you can't pay staff at the end of the month to you can, that's huge. So staffing is definitely the biggest place to look. But then this is where you might need to log in for Imogen's masterclass at the end of the week, because it might all totally depend on what your contracts are or what's in place. You can't mess around with staff hours. If you've promised them they can work 8 till 6 every day and they'll be paid even if they go home early. So you will have to check those. But it might be that there's a way of writing your contracts and other things you do it, so it gives you the bit of flexibility, but you're not taking advantage of staff. But you might look at it and find you might always have had lots of supernumerary staff, which is great on one hand, but it might be you just actually can't afford to do that anymore, because if your gap at the end of the month doesn't work, you might just not be in that position. So then you might be having to think about, if you have less staff, how you can still ensure your provision. It might be things that, like, you've always given staff an hour out each week to do learning journeys, and actually it might mean that you can find clever ways to do it when children are asleep or when some are eating. So still making sure you're in ratios and still obviously responding you need, but there might be clever ways of using your time. And so you might post some things in the feed now about clever things you can do, because anything you can save with staffing is going to make a lot more difference to you then. Yes, sourcing things cheaper, but you always have to bear in mind with sourcing cheaper the time aspect. Now, if you've got your manager on, just plucking this out of thin air, on £15 an hour, there's no point saving a bit of money on your Tesco shop and sending your manager down to Lidl because, you know, bread's 10p cheaper. If it's an hour of her time and she's got to drive there, she's got to unload, and yeah, the shopping might save 30 quid, but then if you're paying 2 hours of the manager's time, you might say, well, actually, it wasn't worth it. But then to you, if the manager's available to you and not in numbers, it might be, well, actually, no, I'm time rich, but I'm not cash rich. But this is why it's individual sometimes to your settings to know what's right for you. It might be that you've got really good link with local providers and you buy in bulk. It might be that, you know, you order a ton sack of sand and you halve it between you and share the delivery costs. And that's where sometimes working together can save money. It might be where you've spent lots of money on disposable sensory, you know, lots of shaving foam and Cloudo and lots of things which are used once and go, that you might say, I'm going to use this maybe once a week, but use different things and use lease for textures and something else. And you're going to take them out on the nature walk to collect them first. So sometimes it's a different way of working. And sometimes it won't necessarily compromise what you're offering education, but it might make you think, well, we've always done it like this, to how could I do it in a different way? And actually sometimes working in new and fresh ways brings a freshness to our practice and the quality as well. So it's not necessarily always a negative. You know, you can have the staff so worried about saving money that it can impact their mood and how they're out with the children. That's not great. But then likewise, if your staff are leaving the lights on as they're going outside, or they've got the heater up on 25 degrees and sat there in a t-shirt, you might say, pop your fleece on and turn it down a bit. And this is where you know your staff teams as well, isn't it? But to do all of this, you've got to know your gap. So there's no point stressing about your pound of paint and you spending hours finding cheaper paint if actually you're all right per month. But then likewise, if you know your gap's only 500 quid at the end, you're going to start getting alarm bells of thinking ahead, thinking, well, hang on, I've not had my big electricity bill yet. It might be, and this is where you need to know your numbers. If you're billed quarterly for something and you suddenly that quarterly bill comes in, have you got the money for it? And that's where, if you can do certain payments monthly, it helps things become more predictable because you're in a pattern of the payments. So you need to know how much give you've got to be able to respond, and particularly that cash flow forecasting ahead, so that when the minimum wage increase, and it might be you pay well above minimum wage anyway, whatever you're at, that you know for April, what is that going to mean? And you know now what it means. So now are you thinking, in April, I know I've got to be saving costs to be able to pay them? Or are you thinking, my gap's not going to be as big, but I can do it? And if you're sitting there thinking, oh no, I don't actually know this, then that's what I'd suggest your action points are. You need to know your gap, because you might be worrying unnecessarily, or actually you might be sitting there thinking, oh, we're sorting that. Actually go, oh, in April, actually, when I multiply all these staff by the increase, that's a big chunk, and actually it's going to hit hard. So it's knowing where it's coming so that you're prepared to ride the storm. Does that make sense? And are there any questions at this point? We got anything in the chat there, Imogen?
The questions that you've answered, the questions that have been raised as they've come in. Actually, I mean, one person is obviously, when you start speaking about business rates, obviously yes, you've got people thinking. So we've had one person post that their business rates have gone up more than 3 times, isn't it? More than
is that 100 to 600? Now, do remember you're comparing £100 per square metre with £600 per child. So it's not quite comparing the same thing. But the important thing is, if you're looking at your business rates, still look at what other local nurseries are down as their per unit. Because if you've got £600 per unit, but the nursery down the road's only been given £400 per unit, that's the sort of thing you can argue. Now, some of them are also incorrect because they're going on incorrect Ofsted reports. Yeah. So I know one nursery that have expanded because they've gone on a report from 6 years ago. The rates haven't gone up, but it says they're only 25 units. Well, actually, they're a 40-place nursery now. So I don't know when and how that'll get picked up. But some people have tried to argue it now and have been told to wait till April. So it might depend on where you're at, but you need to see what it says. So it's, yes, check what it's gone up per unit, or but check what your rateable value's gone up by. Now, for some of you, if you're still under small business rates relief, it might not mean much. For some who've been below small rates relief and this has gone up and it shoots you over, relatively speaking, for you guys, it's going to be the biggest jump, because if you've been paying very little or nothing to suddenly finding £1,000 a month, that could be huge for you. If your gap was 400 a month and you've suddenly got £1,000 business rates bill, you're very quickly going to need to look at how am I increasing my revenue, or how are you decreasing your outgoings? Now, in terms of increasing your revenue of private paying parents, it'd be really interesting if you pop in the comments, do you work out what your cost has gone up by and sort of use that percentage? Do you look at what other local providers are doing and think you've got to try and fit in? Do you always have a set percent you go up each year? Because that's where I've noticed some nurseries get caught out. I mean, it's all very well to work it out and say, my costs have gone up 12%, but all my local, I'm the top of the market, and all my local competitors have barely gone up. If you suddenly went up 12%, although it would cover your costs, if everyone suddenly went, hang on, you were the most expensive anyway, and now the gap's too big, you might find that they say, I can't afford this and I'm going to my competitor. So although you might know your costs have gone up 12%, you might think as a calculated decision, I can't go up 12% here, or I'm going to lose that trust with my parents. So you might say, actually, I'm going to go up 6% now and 6% in 6 months. Or you might say, well, actually, look at, depending where your gap is, you might need to make that personal choice for your nursery. But some settings I've just said, oh, we've gone up that percent because everyone goes up that percent. But actually for your nursery, it might be your costs had only gone up X percent. So it'd be really interesting if you do comment what informs you, because it's all very well looking at your numbers, but you do have to bear in mind what the marketplace around you is doing. Now, it might be that people around you haven't put up as much as they should have because they don't really understand their numbers. But you've got to be aware that, as I said, that if you can't outprice yourself in the market either, because you've got to think about parents and affordability. I mean, you'd like to think the parents got that great relationship with you. They trust you and they know that if you're asking for that increase, it's because you need it to cover the gap. But you have to bear in mind that if you suddenly got 6 full-time children hand the notice because they can't afford it, what does that mean for you? What does that mean?
What's your view on annual appraisals, Jane? Not annual appraisals, annual increases, Jane? Because I know a lot of settings say, well, we haven't put our rates up since 2020, as if almost it's a badge of honour. But when we're going to get to 2023, it's then going to be a big leap that they're going to need to increase their fees.
I've always done it annually, and I've always made it. I think with parents, people might find this, that I find if they understand what's happening and the communication is clear, that's half your battle. So I've got in my financial contract, so for my nursery personally, our fees go up every September and always have done. So it says when parents sign up, this is the fee structure for this academic year, they will go up. But I always say they'll be told on the 1st of August. And I do that deliberately. So they've got a full month. So if they genuinely can't afford it, or it is an issue, they don't feel that they've been bullied into staying because you told me yesterday the fees have gone up tomorrow. They've got a month. So if actually they think it doesn't work for them anymore, they could hand their notice in. Now, unfortunately, we found that doesn't happen. I think because parents know, they feel empowered to make the decision. I think sometimes if they feel pressured, they can react to that. So they know every year it's going up in September and they'll know in August. Now,
we agree with that. We also agree putting on your invoices.
Yeah.
It goes,
and it also says these prices are valid till August 22. So then you haven't got parents going, oh, hang on, I didn't know it was going to go up. Particularly if you've got parents who've signed up. We have a lot of children are waiting this well in advance. So if they inquire in September for the following year, because they've come and look around while baby's only teeny weeny, and they're coming back when they're 1, well, the fees, this isn't what I signed up to. But you've made it clear to them on the registration form, the annual fee review is, and we've got it in the parent handbook, we've got it in the financial contract. You get it in at every angle so they can't say, I didn't know. So, and then I always send a letter and say, that it's coming up. Now, some people said, oh, I need to justify my fee increases. I don't. I literally just put in a letter saying, as per the financial contract, it's almost the same letter, just goes out each year. As per the financial contract, it's going up this month. I often tell them the percent. So this time I did say it's actually gone up 9%. That's less than inflation. We're trying to be as fair as possible. These are the charges. You go to Tesco, your bread's gone up, but there isn't a little letter. I'm so sorry, the bread's gone up, but this has gone up by this and that's gone up by that. And I know it's hard because we, a business, but we're also got that interface with people. It's a personal relationship, and you know that those parents, and you kind of, you feel for them, don't you, as well? But it's a business and it's a relationship, and that can be hard when the issue of debt comes up. And that, I haven't got that on the action thing, but you might need to be even tighter this year where, and this is hard, but when someone says, oh, I can't pay because, and you go, because you know them and you want the child to be included, you go, oh, we'll just pay it next month. Then next month comes and they still can't pay it. You're not actually doing them any favours by letting that go on, because A, you're out of pocket, and B, they're in more debt, and C, then it doesn't help the child because they've got to leave anyway. But that is really hard, because when you've got a relationship with the family, you want to help. And I've been caught out a lot by this, and I'm sure some of you have, where you try to do the right thing and you trust a parent, but actually it could backfire. So, and it might be where parents are gradually paying later by later in a month, because you don't get into the position at the end of the month you can't pay your staff because you've let so many parents slip in their payments. So we've started September recalibrated, kind of say where we had sort of just slipped a bit because you knew parents, actually no, you need to pay by the 7th, then you'll get a reminder. And actually I've not actually had to put the late fee on because parents have got it, and it just sort of reminded them, no, we need to be prompt with the payment, because you have to be able to pay your staff. You can't have those staff working so hard for you and they're not worrying that they're not going to get paid at the end of the month. Oh, right, what's that coming? I made a mistake by not increasing fees annually and said increase is big. Yeah, much more sensible. I agreed to do smaller regular increase, much better received by parents. And yeah, parents know when it's coming. They're expecting it, because if they've, you've not put up for a few years, and parents always say it's £50 a day and it's what they know, they've budgeted, and suddenly they get a letter saying 56. It's a big thing to them, particularly if they weren't expecting it in January or February. Did you say 600 per child? Is that on business rates? Yes, it's often on a unit. So they've done it, say your settings registered for 300 children, 30 children, they might say it's 600 per unit, and therefore your rateable value is 30 times 600. So yes, they're doing it per child per unit on the new from April 23, which is why you can't directly compare that, the figure, because the bit last year was on square meterage, but you can compare it to providers around you to see what they've been given. They use an old report, yeah. And this is where there'll be a lot of people, I think, fighting it, because particularly with Ofsted reports, some of them being 6 years old, so much can change in the life of a nursery. And it can be those nurseries that they've got less children at the moment. So it might be that they're registered for 65, but they can't get staff at the moment, so they're only taking 40. Well, it's a bit rubbish to only be able to take 40, income for 40, but pay business rates on 65. So as I said, for some settings, the business rates is going to be the thing that tips them this year, particularly if they haven't realised, they haven't checked. So that was why the 2 things on your action point there: know your numbers, check if you're eligible for business rates. Are there any other questions there of anything I've not covered, or anything I've said that doesn't make sense, or where to go next with it?
There's no more questions in the thread at the moment, but okay. If you carry on, it might be that people, do post a question. If you've got a question for Jane, we've got her for another 9 minutes. Do ask your questions away, and get your questions answered, because we're here to help. We want you to have as much support as you possibly can. I mean, I've spoken to the VOA in the past. I think it was during the pandemic. Lovely people, couldn't really get that we're calling to say, is this right? So never be afraid to ring up and say, are you sure? I just need to check, and I need you to know something. And if they can help, they will. It's always best to ask. You never lose anything by asking, do you?
And if you don't find you get on too well with them, there's a couple of other avenues you can go. You can get onto your local MP. They're often they're big on these at the moment, particularly if it's affecting childcare settings. I mean, the last thing they're wanting is childcare settings to close at the moment. Your LEA as well, get onto your local authority to fight it as well. Your LEAs are very influential. They have, they don't want nursery settings to close, because it's not good for them if settings close, because they're accountable for providing funded childcare. If you all stopped offering funded places, or settings were closing and they've got to then find places for these funded children, that reflects on them, and it reflects on them if settings are closing. So they don't want it to happen. So if business rates is suddenly going to impact 10 local settings and mean they might face closure, they've got to act, but they need to know. So that's why it's definitely worth double checking what your future business rates could be, and if that's going to be an issue, feeding it back to your school's forum rep as well. So if you know who your school's forum rep is, and if you don't know who your school's forum rep is, find out from your LEA, because they're the ones. I'm school's forum for my LEA. They're the ones who are challenging early years funding figures and saying, have you thought about this, and asking if consider business rates exemption or whatever it is. So find out who your school's forum rep is, speak to your LEA, speak to the VOA, speak to your MP. I think business rates, we're probably going to have more success with business rates than we are with funding rates. Yes, do join Champagne Nurseries Lemonade Funding. Do keep saying. And I think probably with that, we're not going to suddenly see a substantial increase in funding. And if we are, well, as we know, this year's funding's out anyway. But I think still campaigning for the change of the word from free to funded or subsidised, and how it's used. So even if the actual monetary amount doesn't change, the way parents' perceptions can be managed so they don't come along and think it's a totally free place all weeks of the year, 30 hours, you're trying to manage that for free, whereas actually it might be 22 on stretch, and actually, no, we do have to pay for your lunch. So I think, it might be worth working on that one. We'd love all the rates to go up substantially tomorrow, but I think if we can all keep trying to work towards the fact that it was subsidised and parental awareness, that's a good step. What's coming? What's the one thing people should look at tomorrow to make the most difference? What your gap is. Because if you don't know what your gap is, you don't know what you need to do to make a difference. If you know what your gap is, you know what you need to look at, whether it's for you increasing revenue or decreasing outgoings, looking at staff deployment. First off, know your gap, because probably a lot of you'll need to do something anyway. But if you don't know what gap is, you don't know how much you need to do, and it might be a few small tweaks. We're back on track again. It might be actually you need to make significant changes.
And you've made it very simple for people to understand that, Jane. And if they were having their tea or doing something else, as we often do, don't we, when we're listening to these things, you can go back to the recording, watch that section again where Jane's working it through with the worked example for bluebells, dear old bluebells.
I know. Is anyone a bluebell? Sorry.
Well, it works with the colour scheme, doesn't it? And sit and work out what your numbers are. That's and an exercise. I mean, we do it personally, don't we? Every year we look at what our outgoings are and what we can. I mean, horrifying sometimes to look at what you subscribe to that you don't use anymore and things like that. But if you can do that. Start the year knowing, just exactly what you're spending and where you're spending your money. You can then, as you say, divide it by 12 and come up with an average monthly spend and work on that going forward. It's very useful for everyone to do, no matter what stage they're at, whether they've got, multiple settings or just the one setting. Always useful to know your numbers. You'll never regret the time spent working on your numbers.
And if it really isn't your thing and you just don't get it and you can't get your head around it, or you've worked out your gap but you genuinely don't know where to decrease costs or increase revenue, all those things, get in touch. It's one of those things I am doing with settings at the moment. And I had a lovely setting recently that I worked with last year where the owner had to stop working the setting and take on a second job. She was subbing it to keep it going, but she didn't have a clue where her costs were going. Her manager was lovely. The setting was lovely. It didn't have a clue about the cost. Put some really simple things in place. And this year she got in touch to say she's given up her other job. She's making money on a nursery, and it was tens of thousands difference. And she was just saying, not only was I facing closure, I'm making money on it, and I'm enjoying it again, and my manager's happy again, all because I knew the numbers. So get in touch if it's something that if
you get stuck, get in touch. And with, the Facebook groups here. So Jane, you can pop into the group whilst you've done your turn. You don't get off the hook that easily. You can be around for the rest of the week. And if you've got any questions, you can ask Jane a question. In the group, and if it's something that Jane thinks that can help other people, she can respond in the group. So please do ask, and you've got Jane's contact details in this under this video, so you can see how you can get in touch with her by popping along to our website. Couldn't be more straightforward, janetodd.co.uk, and it's on the screen now, and you can find her on Facebook as well, which is obviously something you're all on, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But have you found that useful tonight? This is our first session, so if you can pop in the comments if you've got something to take away, if you've popped something on your key action point, if you've made you think for a minute about your numbers, let us know if you know, we've put this on for you this week. We've got lots of plans for the week, but have we got you thinking? Have we, you know, have we given you something to think about? And did you find that useful? Because this is what it's all about, you know, being able to give something to help you as we start the year. This is what we're very keen to do. Oh, bless you, Olivia. So yeah, we you know, we're here around for the rest of the week. Tonight's first one, but you know, do let us know if we can help you and if we can be of any assistance with any questions you have, because that's what we want to do. We want to help. Lovely. So someone's asking, oh yeah, very lovely to refresh your knowledge. Yeah, that's great. Lots of lovely comments, and I'll let you look at these, Jane, when we finished, because they'll all be sat there, because people are very generously going, yes, lovely, thank you.
Oh, bless you all.
Yeah, exactly. It's you know, this is what we're doing it for, isn't it? So that we can make some help people out and make a difference.
Absolutely.
And I did need to wash my hair. Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for spending the evening with us. And yeah, we're off to a great start. So thank you, Jane. I'm going to say good night, and we'll close off.
Okay, bye for now all.
Bye. In the broadcast.